Greetings and salutations. My name is Entitled Consumer, and today's subject is Star Wars. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Han's Solo film. And you know what? I thought it was alright. There were flaws in its writing, in its concept, and eventually in this review I'm going to argue against this movie having ever been made. But the act of sitting down in a theater and watching it made for a fun experience. It is the second of the A Star Wars Story films, and like Rogue One, also went through an assortment of reshoots by a different director, though in this case there is a stronger separation between the original director and the replacement. Gareth Edwards, the original director of Rogue One, is still listed as the director of his film. In the case of Solo, the original directors Phil Lord and Tim Miller have lost their director credit, though they are still listed as executive producers. I don't know exactly how much was reshot for Rogue One, but it has been widely publicized that Ron Howard reshot over 2/3 of Solo. Regardless of the problems that the film had in its development, the finished product is here, flaws included. You can't judge a film for what it could have been, but rather what it became. I suppose I should mention that there will be spoilers. If you want to see Solo and you don't want to know what happens beforehand, you can stop this. It's not too late to walk away. I've even included a link in the description should you need an escape, of which does not contain spoilers for Solo. Still here? Then let us discuss. The story of Solo is relatively simple. After escaping from the gutters, Han gets caught up in a hyperfuel heist, first so that he could buy a ship that he can use to go back home and save his girlfriend, Kira, from having to live her life out in the slums. Second, to save his girlfriend as well as himself from under the thumb of crime lord Dryden Voss. Like Rogue One, there are certain expectations that are already known from the plot. In Rogue One, it was expected that the Death Star plans will be acquired successfully. The destination is known, more or less. It's the journey that's not. The fate of characters specifically introduced in these separate stories is unknown. As the story progresses, it's expected that Han won't shoot the beast, that once everyone gets to Kessel, there will be need for a shortcut to get out. This movie does play around with those expectations, though, by having Han lose to Lando in their first card game. It's known that Lando lost the Falcon to Han in a card game, as said in The Empire Strikes Back, but I find the explanation of how he lost his ship to be interesting because Lando cheated to keep the Falcon. Han cheated to take the Falcon. I feel it builds up The Empire Strikes Back when Lando talks to Han. He asks what he did with his ship. He still claims ownership of it because he knows Han cheated. It's too bad that not all the explanations told in the film are equal. Based on the interviews with writer Lawrence Kasdan, one of the initial ideas for the story was that Solo was not Han's family name, but rather a name given to him by an immigration officer. Han is traveling alone, thus he is Solo. To quote Lawrence himself, he said, "It's not just that he doesn't have a name, which tells you a lot about his history. He says, 'I have no people.' That to me is so forlorn and so isolating. That said, the idea of Han being a character that is isolated in the universe is not news. Over the course of the original trilogy and the subsequent expanded universe, we learn that Han is a man with precious few friends, and family long gone. It's him and Chewie against the universe. We don't need a new movie to provide more implications for a past that has already been implied. Han is lucky, though. The immigration officer was kind enough to name him Solo based on that description. When Han says that he's alone, the immigration officer could have just said, "Well, you're Mr. Alone from now on." We as viewers are unfortunately unlucky, as we'll miss out on such amazing spin-off films such as Han Alone and Han Alone 2, Lost in Space. I would argue that the only explanation that is done really poorly is that of the Kessel Run. In regard to that, I'm not talking about the reasoning for being on Kessel. The heist for the unrefined hyperdrive fuel is great, along with the surprise robotic uprising. It's only after Han and friends attempt to escape Kessel that things get less interesting, and even derivative at times. It starts with the music. That's something that felt clear to me throughout, was that it's obvious that it's a different John composing this film. Unfortunately, I don't have a very good frame of reference for John Powell's current work outside of Solo. He does a lot of animated movies these days, such as How to Train Your Dragon, The Lorax, and Rio. I have seen none of these. Instead, I watched classic films like Chill Factor and Face Off, which feature his work. My point is that his resume doesn't imply that he's the best choice to copy John Williams' work. And there are a lot of times where it feels like a poor imitation. There are good parts, when the music is trying to do something different, like when the choir shows up during Han's confrontation with the Marauders on the beach towards the end. Immediately after Han takes off from Kessel, he finds himself under attack by the Empire, dodging asteroids. The music that follows isn't just a throwback to the past, but rather just copy and paste. It's the asteroid chase theme from The Empire Strikes Back, music that plays while Han is flying the Millennium Falcon through an asteroid field, dodging the Empire. It's a great song, but using it in the same fashion for the same type of scene isn't particularly interesting at best, creatively bankrupt at worst. There are various dangers that occur during the Kessel run. Will the asteroids hit them? The Empire blow them up? Will the hyperdrive fuel on the ship explode? Will the giant alien eat them? Will the ship fall into the maw? The trouble with all of those dangers is that all of them would utterly destroy the Falcon. If everyone except for one character, along with the ship, has to survive so they can show up in the original trilogy, then there is no danger, because the only danger is ultimate destruction. At the same time, even if you disconnect this film from the rest of the expanded universe, everyone needs to survive in order to reach the end of the film. There are other parts of the movie that don't suffer from this thing, such as the train heist. At this point of the film, there is a cast of characters that have not been seen throughout the rest of the franchise. Much like the cast of Rogue One, their livelihood is not guaranteed. There are chances for the mission to fail. Without the deaths of Solo and Chewie, secondary and tertiary characters can die. The heist can fail. The story can continue regardless of such failure, and new problems can and do arise because of it. As far as the cast of the film is concerned, I thought they were fine. Alden Ehrenreich makes for a pretty good Han Solo. After True Detective and Zombieland, I've come to really appreciate Woody Harrelson a lot more. I'd watch Emilia Clarke in just about anything, though I think after Terminator Genesis, she could be a little bit more choosy on her parts. And Donald Glover crushed as Lando. Phoebe Waller-Bridge was good as L3, I just don't think that the character was very well written. L3 has her own motivations and manages to act on those motivations, and then dies, never to be cared about again. Anyone past that, well, the trouble I think is not them as actors. Thandie Newton, Paul Bettany, the voice of Jon Favreau, they're all well and good, but once you move away from the primary cast to the secondary cast, all the way to the tertiary cast, well, character development drops off. Val and Rio are little more than extensions of Beckett. Dryden's character is little more than the physical threat that motivates Han's actions. And the Marauders? They're a plot device to stall the story, and later to resolve the plot. After they're revealed for who they are we as viewers supposed to just forgive them for their stupid attempt at hijacking the train heist, getting multiple people killed in the process? That said, the plot twist that the villain in the menacing mask was a cute redhead girl with freckles all this time is a plot twist I can wholly support. It's just too bad that her motivations, along with the idea of the rebellion on the rise, feel like they were shoehorned into the story. The end of the movie, during the final confrontation, the Marauders are given the moral high ground, even without the rebellion carelessly mentioned. Once the Marauders present their argument, there isn't even a question as to what side Han is on. Even though Han had killed Marauders earlier in the movie, once Enfys starts to tell her story, and the terrible things that Dryden's gang had done, it's clear that Han is going to side with her, and that he's in no danger from the Marauders themselves. Not that Han's motivations are much more complicated. Han has love interest. Love interest is suffering from troubles. Han must get money to buy ship to save love interest. Though as we know from the original trilogy, love interest does not exist in the main franchise, so it's already known that things aren't going to work out. When they try to leave Corellia, it's not surprising that she doesn't come along. It was a surprise when she just shows up in the story later on, as a subordinate to Crime Lord Dryden. It was interesting in that it appeared that Han was getting an easy victory to his problem, only to discover that things had gotten more complicated in the years that passed between him leaving Corellia and him reuniting with Kira. My only problem with this particular plot twist is that it feels as though Kira's story, that we didn't get to see, feels like it would have actually been more interesting than Han's story. Han goes off, trains in the academy, gets kicked out of the academy. He fights in a war. He fights Chewie, attempts a heist. In the meantime, Kira gets captured by the Empire. Does she get delivered back to Lady Proxima or sent to an Imperial prison? She tells Han that Dryden got her out of a bad spot. At some point, she learns a martial art that the film is unable to show on screen. And then Darth Maul shows up. Was Darth Maul that bad spot, or was it the prison? Kira's there, dodging the Empire, crime and Sith lords. Han's just trying to steal some hyperdrive fuel. Speaking of, I still find the idea that Darth Maul surviving the Phantom Menace to be really stupid. I haven't watched the Clone Wars animated series, so I can't say whether his resurrection is interesting in the context of that show. Within the context of Solo, he looks like he's just there for nostalgia's sake. He's just a puppet, held up by Disney as the puppet master shouts, "Look! It's Darth Maul. Embrace the nostalgia. Look, Darth Maul is holding his double-bladed lightsaber for no good reason at all. Do you remember his double-bladed lightsaber? Look, he's holding it." And then the movie ends. Han shoots first, because that's what he does. His girlfriend leaves stage up, and Han and Chewie fly off to Jabba pastures. Except, if his primary motivation was to save his girlfriend, why does he just forget about her? He doesn't even bother asking Chewie on whether there's a possibility of finding her. Instead, he's going to follow up on a rumor he was told by someone who had just betrayed him only a few minutes ago. His girlfriend, forgotten. Overall, the movie was alright, fun at moments, but suffers from a lack of focus. What is it about? Is it about the origin of an outlaw? The birth of a friendship that would outlast an empire? The filling of plot details? If there's any single thing that I think could have helped Solo, that would be a storyline with a stronger focus. The story of Han and Chewie as they find themselves pulled in deeper and deeper into crime is interesting enough by itself. It didn't need a love story. Though I would argue that if Disney wanted to make movies that took place in the Star Wars universe outside of episodes 7, 8, and 9, I would argue that both Solo and Rogue One were missteps. Give me a second and hear me out. I've been hearing comments that Disney is approaching Star Wars in a Marvel-esque manner, but I would argue that isn't true. The MCU has a wide branching set of stories that generally accomplish one of two things. They push forward the bigger plot that connects all of the films, or they push forward the smaller plot that develops the individual characters. With Star Wars, their approach is much closer to how Lucasfilm managed its extended universe on the literary side. At first, the extended universe began with Timothy Zahn, picking up where the original trilogy left off. But as time progressed, the stories that were written were all over the timeline. The goal wasn't just to move the main story forward or develop the individual character stories, but to find a place in the timeline that hadn't been filled and fill it. Shadows of the Empire came along and filled in that space between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The Han Solo trilogy gave Han an origin story. The Han Solo adventures filled in a gap of time within the Han Solo trilogy. Doing things the Marvel way, emulating the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think would have benefited the franchise. Think about this. Disney buys Lucasfilm, releases Episode 7. Instead of releasing Rogue One, they release a movie that takes place in between Episodes 7 and 8. One of the bigger issues of The Last Jedi was that the status of the New Republic seemed remarkably diminished, the status of the New Order remarkably enhanced. Both sides lost a lot in Episode 7, but somehow the New Order ended up with the upper hand. If there was a film following a different set of characters, such as perhaps a Rogue Squadron film featuring Poe Dameron as the lead character, there might have offered a better explanation as to what happened, along with why superior officers don't trust him. Then, instead of Solo, there would be another film connecting Episode 8 to 9. For now, I suppose there is Episode 9 to look forward to, as directed by J.J. Abrams. And of course, there are still loose ends from the Solo movie that could be followed up on. God willing, we can all meet again in Solo 2, The Search for More Money. Until next time, may the profits of your franchise purchase be with you.